Order, order. Thank you very much, Lord President of the Council, for agreeing to join us today. It's our second public evidence session as the Procedure Committee, and we're very, very grateful that we are able to speak to you and go through, I think, a number of questions that colleagues have around the operation of the House during the pandemic and what plans there are for the future. I wonder if perhaps just before we get going with the questions, Lord President, whether you had any comments you wish to make before we get into questioning.
Thank you, and thank you for holding this evidence session and for the work that you and your committee has done to produce reports very rapidly in relation to the pandemic and how Parliament should sit. The general point I'd make is that since the crisis started, the overriding objective has been to ensure that Parliament could continue to sit. I think it's very easy to forget that when we came back on the 21st of April, the question was whether we would be able to sit at all. And we managed to implement a hybrid system that ensured that there was some continuity in Parliament, even though it was not perfect. But that was a very, very considerable achievement by the House authorities to ensure that the basics of scrutiny were continued with and some element of legislation. And then it's developed from there, and it's developed from there out of pace with the rest of the country to get back to the fuller participation, scrutiny and legislative programme that the government needs. But I'm much looking forward to discussing more of the details of that with you.
Thank you very much. So on that topic, on the 12th of May, I think it was, you announced to the House that you did not envisage having to propose any extension of the hybrid Parliament arrangements, which, of course, as you'll recall, we were all present physically for bringing in on the 21st and 22nd of April. But clearly last week that changed, and there is now some virtual participation in some proceedings, and there's been an extension of proxy voting. So I wonder if you could set out for the committee what led the government to change its mind.
Well, it's very much the House of Commons moving with the country at large. And so we were moving as the country was beginning to open up, and we were making proposals for when schools would come back, ensuring that Parliament was going in line with that. And the message continuing to be that if you can work from home, do, but if your work requires you to attend your place of work, you should be going back to it. And that was the messaging the government was beginning to give very clearly at that point. And then the question was Parliament working properly in a virtual or hybrid sense? And as your committee recognised, it wasn't. It wasn't doing its job completely. It certainly wasn't meeting the requirements of the government's legislative programme. But the scrutiny was very stilted. And so that was why we wanted to move with the pattern of country at large, some weeks later to come back after the Whitsun recess in a physical rather than in a hybrid sense. But as I was making clear on the 12th of May, and subsequently on the 20th of May, that was very much in line with the general advice, not going way out ahead of that, but nonetheless recognising our leadership role.
Thank you. And I think I'm on record as saying that the previous way we were doing things and the hybrid arrangements were suboptimal. I think it would be fair to say that they're still suboptimal in some respects, but clearly we all need to work together on improving that. I'm now going to bring in Anthony Magnall for some more questions on this topic. Anthony.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lord President, for being with us again. Firstly, I'd just be interested in knowing how many weeks of the legislative timetable have been lost over this period. And secondly, this committee produced a report on the idea of, before the government published its motion to rescind support for virtual participation. And I'm wondering what account the government took before asking for the removal of the hybrid settings of that report.
In terms of weeks, we've lost about 7 weeks of the legislative programme. But we were able to continue with a little bit of work on the floor of the House in the chamber, but that was primarily the non-contentious work. And what we lost most of all was work outside the chamber, particularly bill committees. Though I would also say that on the legislative programme, the rights of backbenchers to debate the legislation was severely hampered. So if you take the finance bill, second readings of the finance bill are not time limited. They are until MPs get fed up with talking. And that's really important because, you know, these are charges on the British people, their increases in taxes and so on. And yet all that you had was 5-minute speeches for, I think, about 4 hours. And so we were not only behind, but what we were getting done, we weren't doing in a way that I think was satisfactory for the British people. We've considered the Procedure Committee's reports all the way through. They've been very valuable. And actually, when you go through your recommendations and what the government has actually done, we have done a great deal of what you've recommended, but not necessarily immediately that you have recommended them, but they have been very much where the government has been going.
Thank you.
Yes, the right recommendations, perhaps not in the right order. Is that the way we should perhaps analyse it? I'm going to bring Andrew Griffith in now.
Thank you, Leader. I fear actually your point is probably going to be well made already, because we're sitting here at 3 o'clock and I've yet to see the call list for the third set of urgent question ministerial statements. So the status of having a hybrid is clearly still problematic compared with going back to a fully physical parliament. But my question was really, is there any scope to extend that to substantive debates themselves, notwithstanding my reservations about the way that this one's currently operating?
It's a very good question, and it's something obviously that is open to review. But the difficulty is, how do you make a debate as a debate work when you can't have interventions? I think in our first day back with physical debating, we had something like 60 interventions. In my own speech on us coming back, I think I took over 20 interventions in one speech. And that's how debates need to work. It's testing the argument, developing the argument, evolving the argument. It's not a series of monologues that were written hours before and take no account of what has been said during the course of the debate. So I think with questions, that's fine. The question you wanted to ask half an hour ago is like the same as the one you want to ask now. But in a debate, your speech ought to evolve. And that makes it particularly clunky to have legislative debates involving people coming in remotely and having to reset the programme every 2 hours to get the technology up and running and so on. So it's not something I'm opposed to in principle, it's just in practice, will it work? If I could be persuaded that it would work, then I would have no objection in principle.
Well, I think that this committee will perhaps want to take that up with you, because I think we have some ideas of how it could work and how practically we could allow participation in substantive debates. But on the topic of other business, we're going to have some other questions later on, but Chris Elmore, who can't stay for the whole session, would just like to comment particularly on the point you've just made around public bill committees. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Lord President. The government hasn't made any nominations to public bill committees until last month, which is when obviously you'll be aware that the domestic abuse bill was put forward. You've made statements on the floor of the House that one of the reasons for ending the proceedings before Whitsun, or at Whitsun, was that it was restricted to have public bill committees, or other public bill committees couldn't sit. So can you explain why that is the case, please?
Well, I think you might want to speak to your own Chief Whip in that regard. We'll be able to fill you in on the issues that were arising. These things are arranged between Chief Whips, as I'm sure you're better aware than most. But it's not for me to speak on behalf of Chief Whips.
So it is for the government, Lord President, to appoint for Public Bill Committee through Committee of Selection, and I appreciate you know that, not only tell you your job, but my understanding is that the government did not put forward any option for Public Bill Committee. I am aware through usual channels that clerks, Public Bill Office were able to do a hybrid proceeding for Public Bill committees that didn't involve coming into the House. That was tested with whips from both sides of the House. So I am confused that you say refer to my own Chief Whip or indeed to the Government Chief Whip, because there was testing done. It wasn't progressed by government. The opposition is not, it's not in the opposition's gift to put that forward. There were names from both the SNP, Liberal, Plaid and the official opposition for Public Bill Committee. So I'm just asking specifically what the logjam was in the government bringing forward the Public Bill Committees, because it does appear that other things were in place apart from the government putting forward names.
My understanding on that is different from yours. First of all, on hybrid or virtual bill committees, it was never confirmed to my office that that capability had been tested satisfactorily. So I'm interested that you had that and I didn't. But there was never any question of them having sufficient capacity. We will be having 4 bill committees up and running, and that was never suggested in a virtual system. But I'm afraid I've simply heard something different in terms of the willingness of the opposition to nominate to committees. And so I'm genuinely interested that you had been told that names had come forward, because my information was the opposite. And that's why these things are best taken up by calling Chief Whips to give evidence, because they discuss things directly between them, and you and I hear these things second-hand. But my understanding of the government position is that we were very keen to get the names to the Committee of Selection.
Can I just check at something, because there's some confusion here. When we have taken evidence previously, there's been no suggestion that physical bill committees could meet even when the chamber was operating in a hybrid system. So there was nothing to stop a physical public bill committee from meeting. The hybrid arrangements were for the chamber only. Can you just clarify what the situation is? Because that doesn't seem to be in line with some of the other things we've been told.
That's right. Bill committees could have sat physically, but my understanding was that we were not getting names from the official opposition for those bill committees, and that was a major logjam. But I've just heard differently, and that's why I think this is the matter that needs to be taken up with other people who have the actual answers rather than second-hand answers.
Could we ask you, perhaps, Lord President, if you can find out exactly what the situation is, because it does feel as if we're being told different things by different people, and we would like clarity on that matter. I think we're all frustrated, particularly those of us who were elected on the same manifesto, that some of our legislation appears to have been held up, and there isn't clarity as to why it's been held up. Some are saying it's because public bill committees couldn't meet. You've clearly said that that's not the case. Physical bill committees could have met over the period of the hybrid parliament. Your understanding is it's about not having appointments to the Committee of Selection. If that is the case, there's some breakdown in usual channels, which is not acceptable. We've heard other concerns, so I think we would like to know. I wonder if you could perhaps write to us with the correct position.
Yes, well, I'll tell you my understanding, because that may be helpful. Bill committees could meet, though there was a question of how many, and that nominations were not being made by the opposition. That is the position as I understood it.
Okay. Does anyone else have any points on that? Because I think Kirsty Blackman.
So the statement...
Sorry, Kirsty, we've lost you. Can you start again?
So the statement that was made in the House here about us having...
No, we've lost you again. We'll try... Can you get your microphone closer to your mouth? Because we get the beginning and then we lose you. Why don't you go again?
Is that better?
Yes.
Hear me? Okay, Leader of the House, make a statement in the House.
No, it's gone again.
I've got a hardware issue.
Well, do you want to type the question to me and I'll read it out to the leader and just be absolutely clear. And I know you've got the next set of questions, Kirsty, so I wonder if we can try and find a way of resolving this sound issue before we go on. Perhaps while we're trying to resolve that, James Sunderland, could you perhaps take your question and if Kirsty sets up her iPad, and we'll come back to this if that's okay with you, Lord President. I think what we're seeing is one of the many suboptimal issues around virtual participation. So we're all of us understanding of this, but we also need to understand exactly where we've got to. So James Sunderland, perhaps you could take your question and we'll go back to Kirsty.
Good afternoon, Chair, Lord President. Thank you again for joining us. My question is in two parts. The first part is that on the Wednesday, 3rd of June, what notice did you have that the Prime Minister planned to make an announcement about extending proxy voting?
We've now lost you, Lord President.
No, hello, I'm here.
Good.
The position the Prime Minister outlined was the agreed government position. And I notified the chairman of your committee beforehand, and I notified, or at any rate, the Mr. Speaker had also had an indication that this was likely. I don't think he'd been told formally that it was going to happen the night before. It was pointed at, I think would be fair to say, in a meeting with the Speaker the night before, rather than formally advised.
Thank you, Lord President. And the second part of my question is, when did the government first give notice to the Commons authorities that they would be expected to devise an extension to the current pilot scheme?
Well, the Procedure Committee itself mentions in one of its reports proxy voting. And this was something that was very much under discussion as one of the methods that could be used with a virtual parliament ending or a hybrid parliament ending and getting back to a more physical parliament. So I think all sorts of discussions were going on.
Okay, thank you. If you've no other questions, James, I'm going to bring Chris Elmore in while we wait for Kirsty still. Chris.
Thank you very much, Chair. Lord President, on the area of proxy voting, could you just set out, will members be eligible for proxy voting under this scheme and retain their eligibility as long as the NHS advice to them is to stay at home continued? Just on a sort of very broad brush, as long as that advice stays the same.
Well, the specific details of the scheme following the broad motion passed by the House is agreed by the Speaker and the three party leaders. It will continue as set out in the motion into July, and then we'll have to see where we are in July as to any renewal of it. But the details of the scheme will be, as I say, a matter between the three party leaders and the Speaker to agree.
Thank you. And Chair, if I can continue.
Yeah, of course.
On the basis then that the committee were undertaking, which you'll be aware of, an inquiry before the pandemic started around proxy voting, would you be of the view that proxy voting for parental leave really is now or has become permanent? Not a trick question, Lord President. Things have moved on, and that's all I'm trying to say.
I'm nervous of preempting your committee's report into how it's been working. But if I were to say that I had absolutely no qualms about bringing forward the motion to extend it so that your committee after the election could report, that may give you an indication of my view without preempting your report.
Thank you. Owen Thompson wants to come in and then we're going to go back to Kirsty to start where she left off. So, Owen.
Chair, can I come back on that as well? If
yes, of course. Chris, do you want to finish your questioning? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just in relation to advice from the different nations. And I know the Lord President and I take a different view on this debate in the Chamber last week in relation to what amendment right is to attend. But if one of the nations of the UK, any of them, advice says that you should be staying home, and that's different to the neighbouring nations' advice in terms of the Union of the United Kingdom, does that member follow that advice? And secondly to that, in terms of the proxy system, does the Lord President have a view on not just members who have to, on clinical advice, not attend the House? Does he have a view on parental responsibilities? We have to remember that members too, and indeed have family pressures or may have to stay at home because a family member is shielding. NHS advice is also clear on that. So I just wonder if you could slightly expand on those 2 points, please, Chair.
Okay, yes, certainly. I think everyone has sympathy for people with parental responsibilities. It is such an important responsibility for all of us. As it happens this evening, I shall be moving a motion on sitting Fridays, and one of my children is going to have to come into the House of Commons and sit in my office whilst I'm doing this, because there is no one else to look after her because of the way, well, my family are home in Somerset on my one child who's back at school. And this is very complicated, and I sympathise with members, and I have some experience of it, inevitably. So I think it's important to be sympathetic. As regards different advice, members must to some extent decide for themselves that each member will come to a view on whether, as a key worker, that member decides that the role as a key worker requires him or her to attend Parliament in line with the advice that is being given. But it is important to remember that we are key workers and that therefore going to our place of work is a reasonable thing to do. And that has been in all the government's advice since the beginning of the lockdown. So I don't think there's any inconsistency, though when you get onto ancient constitutional rights, it is worth bearing in mind that considerable elements of our constitution are not actually in specific legislation. That doesn't mean that these are nonetheless important rights that we have. And I think that the right of a Member of Parliament to attend Parliament is an absolutely fundamental right in a democracy, and that any effort to stop a member attending Parliament would be fundamentally undemocratic.
We've got some specific questions on that issue later on, but Chris, if you've finished, I'll bring in Owen, who has a follow-up on specifically on proxy voting.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. Lord President, just on proxy voting, obviously there's been effectively a criteria put in place for members eligible to apply for a proxy vote, and I've seen some organisations suggesting that that could be discriminatory. And I'm keen to get your views on the fact that certainly when Procedure Committee ourselves considered our report, we took great care to remove all references to medical or any specific reasons as a requirement to be eligible. So by having an eligibility criteria rather than a general allowance for any member to apply for a proxy vote in this circumstance, would you consider that actually what has been put in place is discriminatory against some members?
No, I wouldn't, and I think it's very important with all proxy voting that you want to set out criteria for it, because it's important that in the normal run of events, members will attend Parliament to vote. That's quite proper, and it's particularly important in relation to ministers, because ministers often need to be away on governmental business, but that shouldn't be an excuse for not attending Parliament. And so you can't just say it's a carte blanche for anybody who wants a proxy vote. You want to set out criteria. When you set out those criteria, then of course members have a choice, and I absolutely accept that members may well want to maintain confidentiality around any medical condition that they may have, but any member in that position may arrange to have a pair, and that therefore their view will be represented through the pairing system, which is very well established, rather than having a proxy. So if your choice is either everybody can have a proxy, or people have to have a reason, but they are able to maintain confidentiality if they wish, then I would go for the second option.
Kirsty, shall we bring you in now? I know you've got a few questions, so apologies. Lord President, we'll be going slightly back onto the previous conversations we were having about public bill committees and then on to virtual participation. But Kirsty.
And I apologise for the issues that I was having with my hardware. Leader of the House, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is on what you just said about the disclosure that people are going to have to make about what health condition it is that they have in order to get that proxy vote, or in fact in order to participate virtually. Because the criteria have been published, it is possible for the general public now to work out whether or not an MP fits into one of those categories. Does the Leader of the House not think that we have to give enough information to members of the public without having to disclose personal health conditions to those members of the public as well? But maybe it's not something that people have even told their families.
Well, first of all, on the remote participation, the Speaker has written to members setting out conditions under which they will be allowed remote participation, and those are a wide spread of circumstances that I don't think will interrupt people's confidentiality. I think that it has been set broadly enough that simply by appearing remotely will not indicate one has any particular condition, merely that because of the current crisis, attendance at Parliament is problematic because of personal circumstances. With the proxy vote, details of that will be agreed by the three party leaders, and what requirements there are of members in relation to their health and what is information they have to give in confidence, not public information, but they will have to be in one of three categories, either over 70, clinically vulnerable, or extremely clinically vulnerable. And that will be a choice for them as to whether to apply for proxy vote or whether they in fact decide that they would rather be paired, in which case they don't have to give that information at all, nor apply for proxy vote. So I think confidentiality is maintained.
I would suggest on that it's for those members to decide whether or not they feel that they've been discriminated against, and in fact there are members who do believe that they are being discriminated against by this system, and it may be that the Leader of the House needs to reconsider the way that this system works in order that members do not feel that way. I have a couple of other questions. The Leader of the House said during the debate last week that the House plays an invaluable role in holding the government to account and debating legislation, which can only properly be fulfilled when members are here in person. Can the Leader of the House let us know why it was required that virtual participation would be cancelled in order for bills to proceed?
We simply weren't getting government business through. The legislative agenda that was set out in the Queen's speech based on a general election wasn't making sufficient progress with a hybrid parliament, and scrutiny was, to use the terms of your chairman, suboptimal. Even the shadow leader of the House from the SNP was calling for an exclusively virtual parliament because he recognised that appearance in the chamber was beneficial over a virtual appearance, and it seems to me therefore very important to try and get back to proper scrutiny once it was safe to do so, in line with health guidelines and in line with the rest of the country.
So now that we are going to have a hybrid situation continuing, does that mean that it will be impossible for legislation to proceed?
We're not having our hybrid in legislation, and bill committees will sit physically.
I have a couple more questions. The questions around virtual participation and where things are in virtual participation, this will elapse, if you like, on the 7th of July. Can the government tell us what criteria would need to be in place in order for it to continue? And is the Leader of the House also aware that shielding guidance in Scotland has been extended until the 31st of July? So those people in Scotland who are shielding will be required to do so until the 31st of July. And would he consider extending both the virtual participation and the proxy voting on the basis that this has already been, the shielding, for example, has already been extended?
I understand that the proxy voting is going on until later in July anyway, in line with the experiment in proxy voting for maternity and paternity leave. So that has a later end date. But the 7th of July is in relation to the potential opening up that may take place slightly before that, and that we will carry on following the advice that is being given nationally as to how we should proceed. So that's the reason for that date, and we will follow what the rest of the country is doing.
So if I could Kirsty, if I could just ask a point on that, and then I'll bring you back in. I do accept the point you're making, Lord President, about the 7th of July being after the next likely changes in terms of the way the lockdown operates in England, certainly. But obviously on the 20th of May, when the decision was taken not to extend the virtual parliament, we didn't know at that point. We understood, we expected schools to reopen, etc. But on the same basis, surely it would have been better to have continued with the previous motion with a virtual parliament and remote voting until we'd actually come back to parliament after the Whitsun recess, rather than having this strange situation of having to recall parliament in order to bring forward amendments to the motion, the resolution that had been resolved on the 21st of April, which in itself had been suboptimal again because we'd had to come back physically at a point where we didn't want to be there physically.
No, I wouldn't agree with that, actually. I think that we were looking at the position that the government was announcing in relation to the reopening of schools on the 1st of July. We were coming back on the 2nd of June, a day later. There was always the possibility that events would change between the 20th of May and the 1st of June / 2nd of June, and that our motions had been promised to members as temporary. I think for us to have extended the motions beyond the point at which the government was advising schools to go back would have shown a lack of leadership from Parliament, and that therefore we needed to be looking at what was happening elsewhere. I actually think the comparison with schools is very good, because some schools have made great strides in terms of hybrid learning, but that hybrid learning is not as good as learning in the schoolroom. And we see that with Parliament. A hybrid Parliament is not as good as a real Parliament, and we were trying to get back to it, as I say, in line with the rest of the country.
So in that case, would it have been better to have done the work, the motions that we did on Tuesday last week, on the 20th of May, before we rose for the Whitsun recess? I just don't understand why we had this recall of Parliament needed to happen in order to do things that we could have done before the Whitsun recess.
Well, because I didn't think we could have done it before the Whitsun recess, because things were evolving, and that a near fortnight during the course of the pandemic can see a significant change in either direction as to the requirements that there were going to be. And therefore you couldn't be certain on the 20th of May what the position would be on the 2nd of June. A technical recall, a recall of a couple of hours, meant that motions could be put down on the Monday for the Tuesday, whereas if we hadn't had that recall, any motions for the Tuesday, the 2nd, would have had to have been put down on the day that Parliament rose for the Whitsun recess. But that was at a position where it wasn't entirely clear what the situation would be nationally. It was clear what it would be hoped for, but not what the actuality would be. So that's why we had to do it as more information became available.
I suppose I will bring Kirsty in a moment, but we recommended, of course, that the motion should have been extended to the 3rd of June to avoid that need for the recall. I guess as it would have expired on the 3rd of June, would that have been so bad?
Well, I think that we wanted to be getting back to normal in the same way that the schools were, and that schools were planning to go back on the 1st of June, as indeed they did in a limited way, and we wanted to get back to normal at the same time, and I think that made absolute sense and gave us the ability to consider where we wanted to go at that stage, which we have then done. But I do think it was always important for us to be going with the country at large.
Okay, thank you. Kirsty, sorry, got in your flow.
That's okay, dear. Just on that, Leader, you've just been very clear with us about the fact that things were evolving pretty quickly, things were changing, and you're right, things could have gone either direction during that 2-week period. Do you not accept that you made a mistake, that this was the wrong thing to do, and that the government apologise and say, we're sorry, we should have done this the other way around, because that would have meant much less upheaval and much more certainty for everybody?
Well, you can't provide certainty in an uncertain world as a general point of principle. But no, I think it was right for MPs to be coming back. I do think we have a leadership role in our communities. And the very clear message from the government was that people who couldn't work effectively from home ought to go back to their workplaces. And I think you have to recognise there was a change of emphasis between the early stage of the lockdown and the second stage of the lockdown. Once we were into the second stage of the lockdown, the emphasis to going back to work, if that was the only way you could do your job properly, was much stronger. And that is what we were following. And I think it's only right that MPs do what they are telling their constituents to do.
But the only reason that we couldn't work from home was because the government removed our ability to work from home. So, you know, we were put in that position. But my next question is about proxy voting, and I'm sorry if I missed this when I had to leave because of my sound issues. Can you let us know when you think the proxy voting will be brought in?
Well, on your first point, the reason we couldn't carry on working from home is that we weren't running Parliament properly. So we couldn't do our job properly that way. The details of the proxy scheme are being discussed between the representatives of the three-party leaders and the Speaker, and they're the ones who, under the standing order, modelled on the standing order for paternity and maternity leave, are the ones who have to agree the system, and they are working on that. And I think the Speaker said last week he hoped that it would be introduced early this week.
One last question, Chair. Just on the question of doing things properly, does the Leader of the House not agree that the scenes that we saw in Parliament last week with the voting, with the very, very long line and the 45 minutes and the people having to stand outside and the lack of social distancing, that certainly was not doing our jobs properly?
Well, the first vote took 45 minutes, the second vote took just over half an hour, the third vote took just under half an hour. People got used to the system. As I said in the debate that preceded that vote, there were bound to be teething problems, and I think there will be later this week an even better system that Mr. Speaker's been working on to deliver for MPs. But inevitably, in the midst of a pandemic and the crisis surrounding it, some things that are introduced will improve with time. That's just how things work. But I don't think MPs should be ashamed about queuing for 45 minutes. I don't think that was an impossible burden to put on members of Parliament. I think it's something our constituents are quite used to.
I would concur they're quite used to it, as I think we all are when we're queuing for the supermarket, but they perhaps don't have to do it on their way to work. And I think our constituents want to make sure that we do have the maximum time available to do the job that they elected us to do. So I hope we'll be moving away from that particular form of divisions as soon as possible. You've indicated, Lord President, that there will be a change in the way divisions operate. Are you able to give us any more information on that?
I think it's really a matter for Mr. Speaker, and I don't want to tread on his toes.
And do you know when we're likely to be able to use the new form of divisions?
I saw a test of it this morning, and it seemed to work efficiently. I think during the course of this week is the aim, but quite rightly, the Commons officials are trying to ensure that it works properly before introducing it. So it's being worked on. I will give you I'm not trying to be coy about this. It involves using your MP's card to swipe in the division lobby. And it seems a quicker and efficient system, but it is being tested, and it is, as I say, a matter for Mr. Speaker.
I mean, I think we would be very interested in trying out on these tests. One of the things that we were keen to do when remote voting was being introduced, obviously at the recommendation of the government's motion that asked for remote electronic voting, we on the Procedure Committee did take part in a number of trials before there were trials of the full system. I think that it is disappointing that members of Parliament were not able to try out the system that we tried last week before votes went live under that system. And likewise, I would recommend, if at all possible, that there are some opportunities for members to try the new system so that the teething problems, which we saw on remote voting when we did our first widespread trial of it, and other things, can be ironed out before it goes live, and we end up with, for example, the security issues we saw with the previous system. Can I just ask one final question on divisions before I move to Owen, who's going to ask further questions on divisions, but this is specifically on how much time these votes take. Now, clearly, with 2 metre distancing, any division, even using card readers in the lobbies and more opportunities to vote, is still going to be a longer vote than we've had previously, and in the ideal world when we can all be in the division lobby and get through and declare a vote within 15 minutes. So will the government be looking at extending the amount of time in programme motions that's allocated for scrutiny to compensate for the fact that we may be spending a great deal of the day not scrutinising government but actually queuing up to vote?
It obviously depends on the stage of the bill that you're at, that at second reading and on debates on motions, where the vote is taken at the end of the day, it merely means we stay a bit late. It doesn't mean that any time for scrutiny is lost. I'm very conscious of your point in relation to Committee of the Whole House and the fourth stage, and your point is noted. Let's see how long it takes for the new system. But there is always a balance within this, and we all know that the call for divisions is something that is always subject to the desire to debate, and that works in a way that ensures that the major issues are voted upon, but that divisions, the result of which are known before the vote takes place and simply eat into time, are not always forced. But MPs have a right to force a division if they want one, and it's, as so often within the House of Commons, it's a balancing act with everybody recognising that ultimately business needs to be concluded, but there needs to be proper debate around it, and how you adjust the time requires an element of goodwill on all sides.
And on that point, will you consider changing standing orders so that more deferred divisions can be used? Because clearly, at a time when we're in a pandemic, members are naturally nervous about coming into close proximity with colleagues, particularly as we're in this unique position. We don't do our jobs close to our home most of the time. We're one of the few key workers where our jobs are almost certainly a long distance from our homes, and we are travelling back to our homes, potentially taking with us whatever we pick up here, or bringing with us whatever we have from our constituencies. And I think that movement, the more that can be minimised, I suspect people would be very happy to see that. So I wonder whether you'll looking at deferred divisions as the committee recommended.
I'm well aware of your recommendation. I think it's a helpful recommendation, and it's under discussion. It's simply a question of how do you make it work, because the point at which the most time would be saved by deferred divisions is at the point at which deferred divisions are the least helpful in terms of the progression of business.
Okay, thank you. Can I bring Owen Thompson in again?
Thank you, Chair. Lord President, the system of electronic voting that we used between the 12th and 20th of May obviously was a system that many members had, I think, got used to. Could I ask if ministers identified any technical defects in that system as opposed to user error?
Inevitably, there's user error with new systems. The system is not the problem within the system. The problem is within how MPs should be carrying out their job. And you may have noticed MPs tweeting about how they were voting. And with every piece of legislation, every change in the law, you are restricting people's freedoms, potentially creating new criminal offences. And it seems to me that this is a serious thing that should be done not when people are going for a nice walk or whatever they're doing, but when they're physically in Parliament attending to the business of Parliament. That's the real problem with remote voting.
So, I mean, I absolutely agree that it's a sort of a fundamental part of the job is the being ability to cast a vote. And obviously, the electronic system that we were using was allowing between 500 or 600 members to vote without error in each division, which could be completed in around 15 minutes without any need to queue. Could you tell us why the system just now that's excluding almost a couple of hundred or more members at a time is preferable to the system that actually allowed all members to participate and actually fully carry out their jobs?
Because it's an understanding of what Parliament is. Parliament is an assembly of the nation coming together to make a decision. It's not somewhere where people remotely are sending in their views. And so Parliament is a single whole that takes place at Westminster, with people representing their views, arguing for their views, putting their views, discussing their views, coming together as one, not remotely sending in an opinion. It's about the oneness of Parliament as much as anything else.
So do you consider it's preferable then to exclude a couple of hundred members from the ability to participate?
Proxy voting has been introduced for members who have a particular medical need, and pairing is available as well. So there are systems to compensate and ensure that all views are taken account of.
Of course, pairing doesn't actually record any view of either member, but I think that's a point that we can possibly agree on. But moving on from that, do you expect the system that you've touched on of possibly for touchpad voting to come into operation? Do you think that will require further modification to standing orders?
The system for divisions, as I indicated to Madam Speaker, I was just trying to be helpful to the committee.
Okay, but if it did happen to show particular efficiency, do you consider that would be extended towards the end of the pandemic rather than another short-term period? I mean, let's see how any new system works before trying for me to jump to conclusions, and I hope the Procedure Committee would have views on it anyway, which would be very valuable to further consideration.
Thank you very much, Lord President. I think we need to see how this new voting system operates. As I say, if perhaps there can be some tests that maybe we can participate in, we would appreciate that. But if we can now move back to the question of scrutiny of legislation, and Rob Roberts has questions.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Lord President. Apologies for being late to the meeting. My first question is regarding bill committees. We've scheduled 4 bill committees to run this week with 18 sittings, and I'm interested to know what estimate you've made of the number of House staff that are required to attend in order to service those committees.
The number of House staff that has gone up, been needed with the physical attendance, is about 100.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that the normal number that would be required, or have we deliberately scaled that down to the minimum number? Would it normally be 100 for that level of sitting?
We're running at a much lower level of staff working in the Palace of Westminster. Anybody who can work from home is continuing to work from home in accordance with government guidelines.
Excellent, thank you very much. And with regard to scheduling and the calendar, can I ask which bills the government is anticipating putting through committees by the time the House rises for the summer adjournment? And indeed, how many statutory instruments the government requires to be considered in DL committees during the same period?
Well, I can't really preempt my weekly business statement about exactly the number of bills that will go through, but you're absolutely on the money with your question. That is the issue of needing to be back, that there are so many important bills going through them. There is the domestic abuse bill, there is the trade bill, there is the finance bill. we have an active programme. We've got 4 committees, as you said, this week. We may need more. We had, I think, over 30 bills in the Queen's speech that we need to deliver on, and we lost 7 weeks of business. And so you're asking the right question. There is a busy programme. As regards statutory instruments, not only have there been the statutory instruments in relation to the coronavirus crisis, but there are all the usual statutory instruments that are required. And on an average month, I think we run at about 100 statutory instruments. And I would expect it to be not far short of that, excluding recesses for the rest of this year.
Can I just confirm, is that 100 statutory instrument committees per month? Or
No, it's 100 statutory instruments on average a month.
That makes more sense.
A sitting month. It's not
yes.
Not as many as that, obviously, for a reason.
No, understood. So can I just go back to this point we were talking about the physical issues around holding public bill committees? So clearly there was nothing to stop a physical bill committee being held between 21st of April and last week when they started being held. Nothing in the resolution of the 21st of April stopped that. But we know there are issues around rooms that can accommodate. I think the minimum number in a public bill committee is 16, is that right? So what is being done to make sure there is space available to run the public bill committees? And are you considering running public bill committees not just on the usual Tuesdays and Thursdays, but actually 4 or 5 days a week?
Consideration being given to all of that. You're absolutely right. And to which of the committee rooms are large enough to facilitate public bill committees, including consideration being given to whether, not Westminster Hall itself, but the room off Westminster Hall referred to as Westminster Hall should be used for public bill committees.
And more hours per week for debate?
That's certainly being considered as to whether other days should be used, yes.
I mean, I think given that we have lost the time that was available, this committee is keen to make sure that we do make progress quickly, and therefore, speaking on behalf of the committee, I think we would be happy to endorse increasing the number of days that a public bill committee meets. I know that's an imposition on those members of the committee, but as you rightly say, Lord President, this is the important work of scrutiny that members of Parliament are elected to do, and it's quite right that scrutiny should happen. But you did touch on Westminster Hall and other opportunities. I mean, clearly, as members of Parliament, we have 3 core responsibilities: scrutiny, the passage of legislation, and representation. Now, representation can be achieved for now through the virtual participation for members who have health concerns, and obviously those of us who can be there physically can do so. Clearly, passage of legislation, we need to clarify what actually went wrong over the 7 weeks, but we can see that happening. But representation is a problem in terms of our constituents and backbench business. And so if Westminster Hall, the Grand Committee room, is going to be used for public bill committees, what is going to happen in terms of I know we have some adjournment debates, but the normal run of adjournment debates, how are we going to manage with private members' bills, where clearly you've got a debate about that later? What about opposition days, backbench business? How can we make sure that as backbench MPs we can properly represent our constituents?
Yeah, absolutely. The Clerk of the House, I know, gave you evidence recently, and he said in relation to Westminster Hall that in terms of staffing that was going to remain difficult, and that the effort to keep people working from home, if possible, I think means that Westminster Hall is not going to be coming back immediately. But you're quite right, it is important that we have the representation of members. In terms of backbench business days, we've got backlog with government business, and therefore government will take most of the time currently, but I'm very conscious of the standing order requirements to have backbench business days made available, and I'm particularly conscious of the Petitions Committee's requirement for debating time. So we are looking at ways that we may be able to facilitate that, as well as the legislative and the normal scrutiny agenda.
Yes, Lord President, we were both members of the committee that recommended this committee when it recommended the use of Westminster Hall for petitions. So we could both take some credit for that. Can I bring in Kirsty Blackman again?
Just to say briefly, the issue with staffing is quite concerning for the committee, and we did include in our report that we were concerned about any increase that there may be in the number of staff. And we were told by the clerks last week that the number of staff has gone from 670 to 1,065. So I would appreciate it if you, Leader of the House, could agree that in going forward, any decisions that are taken about legislation, for example, it is considered that the staffing requirements that there will be for any of those things that happen. I appreciate the Leader of the House just said that in relation to Westminster Hall, and I do appreciate the stance, but if he could agree that he will do that going forward, then that would be appreciated.
The House authorities are very conscious of the need to encourage people to continue working from home, but also to go back to work if at all possible. And as I understand it, the number quoted for the increase in staff on site includes contractors, as some of the building contracts are coming back on operation as well. So that's not a figure that relates to the return of members of Parliament, which is a much lower number in terms of the increase.
There's not that many others. There's an additional 200, for example, between the common staff and the PDS staff. So, you know, that is 200 additional staff that are purely there to service members, and it's not just about the contractors. But my substantive question is in relation to the business. Given that there are significant restrictions on travel for some members, some who may not fall into the categories of being able to virtually participate or allowed a proxy vote, would the Leader of the House give us an undertaking that he will consider giving us more than 1 week's business in the business statement, because travel is really very difficult at the moment. For example, from Aberdeen, there's only one flight a day. I know that Northern Ireland, and not even every day, and I know that Northern Ireland has got similar issues. If you could consider extending that as far forward as possible, then that would be really helpful for members who do have to attend Parliament physically at this time.
Thank you. That's an extremely good point. I'm always keen to give as much information about the future business as possible, and had got back to giving a fortnight's business earlier in the year. If I can get back to that, I will try to get back to that. I think it is helpful for members.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to move on now to questions around, a series of questions from Sir Christopher Chope about written questions and parliamentary and answering of those questions. Sir Christopher.
Chairman, can I come in with something first? Because I've been handed a note clarifying on the issues of the delays to public bill committees.
Oh, thank you.
Which may be helpful to you and may save further correspondence. So there are a number of problems. It wasn't purely the putting of names to the Committee of Selection. It was a question from the House authorities about capacity issues with facilitating enough PBCs physically with social distancing, which wasn't going to work for the government. That led to a delayed start on virtual public bill committees, and by the time preliminary testing on virtual public bill committees was possible, it was clear that the country was already going back to work, with schools going back, and therefore there was then the move to come back here physically. But now it is possible to have the 4 concurrent public bill committees, which is going to go up from now. So it was actually more complicated than I was initially saying. It wasn't just the names from either side. It was the question of what could be facilitated virtually, how the testing was going, and then the changes in the government's policy with regards to reopening things.
Okay, that is helpful. It perhaps raises more questions because clearly physical bill committees could have met then in the rooms 10 and 14, which we know are the only rooms big enough for those at the moment. There was the work being done on virtual public bill committees. I just don't understand why the government, given the urgency and the need to press on with this legislation, why the government did not go ahead with just 2 physical public bill committees then when it could have done pre-Whitsun recess, which would at least, I mean, I think we got through 5 second reading debates in the virtual system, and we could have started those public bill committees. It does feel it needs some more questions answered, I think, perhaps is the way to put it, Lord President.
Speaking from the government's point of view, we were very keen to get public bill committees going.
Okay, so I think we're saying that it would have been possible to have had a physical public bill committee meeting before Whitsun in the rooms that were big enough. There were some questions of debate. There was some talk about whether a virtual way of doing this might be possible. That wasn't the case, but in any event, the government has somehow managed to lose 7 weeks of time for public bill committee debates through various reasons.
We were very keen to have public bill committees.
Okay, let's move on to written questions then, and Sir Christopher Choate.
The champion of backbenchers within government and backbench rights, if he can do something about the unacceptable delays in responding to written questions. I've raised this myself before, and a lot of other members have, but the latest figures are that as of yesterday, there were 189 priority written questions to the Department of Health and Social Care, which had not been answered on time, which we received holding replies with no indication as to when replies might be forthcoming. And I know the Lord President has been sympathetic to the burden upon the Department of Health and Social Care, but can I remind him that it is essentially an English-only department, so this is a lack of service to English MPs, and obviously it's the lead department at the moment in suppressing individual freedom, and that's why there are a lot of questions being raised about the restriction of individual rights. Just as one example, I have been trying to raise the issue of the 6-foot social distancing measure, the justification for it, the rationale for it, and so on. And I am finding it impossible to get timely answers, although this is of great public importance.
Yes, look, I'm very conscious of this. I am slightly defensive in regards to the Department of Health and Social Care, because I think, as it is at the forefront of tackling the crisis, a lot of the officials there who would have been answering parliamentary questions are dealing with the crisis, and therefore I would ask members to have a certain sympathy and patience with that particular department. However, I have now got figures across departments for those who are not performing well, and I will undertake to write to the responsible ministers to encourage them to improve their responsiveness. And as it happens, the Department of Health and Social Care, that has the most outstanding holding answers, does not have the lowest percentage of answers for named day questions on the figures that I've got. I won't name the department at the moment, but I can assure the committee that I will take this up. I take it very seriously. And when I was on the committee, there was a problem with a particular department, and the committee called in a junior minister and then indeed the Secretary of State to answer questions as to why the department was not answering questions fast enough. And that is something that your committee, I think, has the authority to do if the situation deteriorates further or doesn't begin to get better. But I will do my best to make sure it gets better before you need to do that.
Thank you, because the figures we've been given are that the second highest department for not answering is the Department for Work and Pensions, with 29 outstanding replies, and that compares with 189 for the Department of Health and Social Care. So what could be done to try and help the Department of Health and Social Care give priority to answering these questions?
I think with that particular department, I would simply ask for a little bit of patience. They really are at the forefront of dealing with the crisis, and that requires a little bit of time. And I would say in their defence that sometimes as they've been drafting the answers, events have overtaken the answer that was being drafted, which is not normal, that normally an answer doesn't change in the few days it takes to draft.
But do you accept, Lord President, that the Department for Health and Social Care is the department which has the greatest public interest at this time, and that if members of Parliament raise on behalf of their constituents questions, the only avenue for them, essentially, because we haven't got Westminster Hall debates and so on, the only avenue for them, essentially, is to put down a written parliamentary question?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. I recognise the importance of holding departments to account. On the figures I've got, the Department of Health and Social Care has answered, of its ordinary written questions, 80% of them within 5 working days. So, absolutely, the list of the number of holding replies is too high, but in the round, it's not doing, considering the pressures on it, it's not doing as badly as all that.
Well, it seems to me, from my own experience, that what's happening is that the more sensitive questions are being delayed and delayed so that the department doesn't have to account for its behaviour.
Fortunately, the Secretary of State's been coming to the House regularly,
yes,
and now we've got a physical Parliament back. There's more opportunity to ask him testing questions. So if that were their strategy, which I'm sure it isn't, the Secretary of State will be on the floor of the House to answer directly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. Can I now, we'll move on to the points we touched on earlier, Lord President, around the right of a Member of Parliament to attend Parliament, and Suzanne Webb's going to start that.
Thank you, Chair. So the question is in your view, can individual members lay claim to a right to attend the House without interference? And if you believe this is the case, if this is right, which attaches to, does it attach to individual members, or to allow the Institute of Parliament to function?
The right to attend Parliament is very ancient, and Erskine May dates it back to 1340. And it's absolutely right to say that it attaches to the individual member for the purpose of allowing the institution to operate. So you can't, the institution couldn't operate if nobody was allowed to turn up. But the clerk giving evidence to you quite rightly pointed out that it mustn't be an undue interference. And it's been well established that a Member of Parliament committing a criminal offence can be arrested for that criminal offence, regardless of whether or not that Member of Parliament is going to Parliament, and that a Member of Parliament can be held in prison for a criminal offence. What happens if a law is passed which makes attending Parliament a criminal offence is a very, very interesting question, and one I think that would give our learned friends food for thought and fees to pay for food. There has never, as far as I'm aware, previously been any suggestion of a law that would make the attendance of Parliament illegal. And there, I think you would have a clash of constitutional principle. And I would hope that the right to attend Parliament would override it, because I think that is an absolutely fundamental right within our democracy.
Thank you.
Can I bring Rob Roberts in?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lord President. You preempted my question with skill and alacrity. Very well done. My question was what recourse a member would have against regulations which may appear to prevent travel to Westminster to attend the House. This is particularly relevant, perhaps, in the devolved administrations, which has slightly different rules to England. And what happens if a member, in trying to potentially breach regulations to get to the House, was detained by an authority enforcing said regulations?
I think it is helpful that MPs are key workers, and key workers have throughout the crisis been allowed to travel, and that therefore this hasn't arisen even theoretically, and I think that is worth remembering and bearing in mind. But I would expect the clash to be resolved in favour of the Member of Parliament, because I think it is a most important right. Democracy depends upon the executive and agents of the executive not being able to stop those who hold the executive to account doing their job. And there is such a clear difference between somebody who has committed theft or another crime of that kind, and somebody whose mere crime is trying to attend Parliament because of a state regulation. And I think we would be in very dangerous territory if the state tried to stop members attending Parliament.
Can I bring Owen Thompson in, and then I'm going to question on this issue as well. Owen.
Thanks again, Chair. Lord President, obviously we've seen regulations laid out that suggest that we could even be down to regional variations in lockdown, never mind the different nations in the United Kingdom. But if one part of the UK were to legislate to impose a lockdown regulations in a way that would prevent members attending, would the Parliament be entitled to legislate to remove that restriction?
Well, there are a number of points there. First of all, essential travel has been allowed throughout the lockdown, even in the most severe part of the lockdown, and attending Parliament is clearly essential travel. No regulation can be passed without ultimate parliamentary authority for it. And the question that the courts would face is if any regulation purported to stop an MP attending Parliament, was that valid on the act that it was supposed to be drawn from? And that would be a legal question. Personally, I would be surprised if it were held that a regulation, anything short of primary legislation, could restrict the right of a Member of Parliament to attend Parliament.
Okay. And just finally, on that, Lord President, I wondered if we get any indication of how many other key workers are required on a weekly basis to travel maybe 400, 500, 600 miles, or as I think the Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland indicated, make an 18-hour journey to attend their essential place of work?
Well, the role of a Member of Parliament is an exceptional role and a very privileged one.
If I can just pick up on these points, if you're finished, Owen. So I last week had a conversation with my local authority about local lockdowns that might come in as a result of test and trace. Now, clearly, I think we can all agree, and we agree, that yes, there is a role for parliamentarians in scrutinising the executive and representing their constituents in Parliament. But our job is wider than that, and we have a place of work which is also in our constituencies, representing our constituents and ensuring that we are dealing with casework. And I think, whilst I accept the point you've made, Lord President, that getting back to Parliament is an important statement that needs to be made. Although we were, of course, in Parliament before Whitsun recess as well, that was, of course, possible. But we also have the job of representing our constituents, and I think it would be fair to say that members of Parliament and their staff have worked incredibly hard over the last few weeks, dealing with an unprecedented amount of casework, individual casework from constituents who needed help and support to obtain the financial support, very welcome financial support from the government, to help people who had issues around childcare, issues around benefit, and an unprecedented, as I say, number of cases. Now, we do that job in our constituencies. So going back to my point, when I spoke to my local authority, they told me that if there was a local lockdown in my area, then if I was in Westminster, I would not be allowed to return to my constituency and enter the local lockdown. And if I was in the local lockdown, they would not expect me to leave there because it would be going against the government's own advice on how to manage local lockdowns. I just wonder, how do we square this? There's a tension here and we need to resolve it.
Well, that somebody has a right doesn't mean that that person always wishes to exercise that right. And I think that's important to bear in mind, that if the test and trace system said to me that I ought to quarantine myself, in spite of my undoubted and ancient right to attend Parliament, I would not attend Parliament for 14 days. but I would do so as a choice, because my absolute and undisputed right to attend Parliament is not something that ought to be taken away. And I think most MPs would make the same choice, and you, in your constituency, if advised by your local authority, would similarly be entitled to make a choice as to what you then did without affecting your right. But the principle is nonetheless a very important principle, because if it were a very broad area that were told was unable to come, you might find that a whole area of the country was unrepresented, and that would seem to me to be potentially dangerous in terms of our democracy.
Or potentially all MPs stuck in Westminster unable to get back to their constituencies and do that very important part of their job in their constituencies.
Well, I must confess that before I came back to Westminster, I checked with the powers that be that I was in fact allowed to go home to my family, and the answer was that I was allowed to go back to my family, and that is true for MPs.
But is that the case if there was a local lockdown in the area your family was in?
There haven't yet been any local lockdowns.
Understood.
So I think we're getting very hypothetical at this point.
Okay. Well, it might be worth perhaps, Lord President, perhaps if you could consult with your ministerial colleagues, because I think there will be members who will be very concerned that they could find themselves in a hotel or for 2 weeks or more away from their constituencies, unable to carry out their constituency duties due to, if you're in a hotel, you perhaps don't have technology, etc. People will be very, very concerned about that.
And I do think you've made a very important point about how much has been done by MPs in their constituencies during the course of this crisis, that I think the volume of work MPs have had has gone up very, very significantly, and the sort of commonplace view that MPs don't do any work except at Westminster is one that is very unfair, not just to MPs but also to our staff, who have done an additional amount of work over an exceptionally busy period.
Hear, hear, and I think we should all put on record our thanks not just to our parliamentary staff, all of whom we are making sure work from home and do not come into Parliament even if we are here physically, as they didn't, of course, during the period between Easter recess and Whitsun recess, but also to the staff of the House of Commons, because I think the changes that the staff have dealt with and the fact that they were able, you'll recall that we made a report on, I think, the 8th of April saying that it didn't seem at all possible that we would be able to have any kind of remote voting, and within weeks that remote voting had been delivered. I think is a great testament to the professionalism of the staff and the risks they're putting themselves at by attending Parliament physically.
Well, I think the House of Commons authorities have done an absolutely magnificent job, and have done things that no one thought that could be done when we went away for Easter. I'm full of admiration for what they have done.
We're now going to move on to what's going to happen next. Just a couple of questions, Lord President. I know you've got a debate to prepare for. I think some of us will also be participating in that debate. But I'm going to bring Suzanne Webb in with a question about looking forward.
So what particular concerns have you had about the operation of the Commons procedures since you actually took your role as the leader?
Well, it's a very important question, because the Commons procedures are here to facilitate the efficient operation of Parliament rather than being here as an end in themselves. And I think we have had the most extraordinary period of flux in an understanding of procedures. And I think here the Procedure Committee could be enormously helpful if it were to look at how things have changed over the last couple of years, not just in relation to the coronavirus and how we've had to adapt, but into things that happened before that, and to see whether we need any areas of clarification. Because I think what's most helpful with procedures is that members, clerks and so on know precisely where they stand, rather than finding that things can move erratically.
I think you've actually answered my next two questions, which are about what were plans to address these concerns, and I'm glad that you said that the Procedure Committee can help and assist you on that. And my next question was to ask you, how can the Procedure Committee help and assist you? And I think you've answered that one too. So
Could I add one thing? When I was on the Procedure Committee, we looked at a revision of the standing orders simply to tidy them up and get them back into a coherent whole, because they've been edited and sub-edited so much over the years that they're not in the order that one would like. And we did this work very thoroughly, and then the then government just put it in a drawer and ignored it. I think this would be a very useful exercise to review that work so that we could have a sort of more orderly book of standing orders.
Lord President, you've preempted my final question, which was to ask you when you were going to bring forward proposals for revision of standing orders. But also, I suspect, are you keen to look at forthwith questions and also the use of SO24 debates?
I think your advice on that would be very, very welcome. And we've got an SO24 debate today, and they do have a very useful role in bringing forward things that members want to discuss urgently, but they're not there to overturn Standing Order 14. Forthwith was a rather complicated ruling, I think, but the problem with a system that operates on precedent is that if precedent is arbitrarily broken, that becomes the new precedent until it's reset. And I think the Procedure Committee could be extremely helpful in looking into this, because if you look into it, it has the virtue of being done impartially, rather than it being something that is seen as a government settling scores, which I have no desire to do. I just want a standing order rule book and procedures that work to the benefit of the House. And so your work on that would be very welcome.
Well, we will look forward to seeing your proposals for amendments to standing orders. I assume that should such motions be put on the order paper, they would be a matter for the House to decide, as is customary with House business. And we look forward to that. And if I could perhaps thank you on behalf of the committee. It has been put, you will have noticed I have been chairing the meeting via WhatsApp, which is again a new technological way of doing these things, as we're all in different places. But one of our members was keen to make sure that we credited you with being such a technological innovator. And being the leader of the House that has overseen such technology revolutions. So we do thank you for that, Lord President. And thank you again for your time. I know you have a debate to prepare for. We do appreciate that you have given us a significant amount of time today. And we will reflect on all that you've said.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.